Hi guys, Amir here. So I started a series a few months back about recommending books based on certain tropes in romance. And today we are going to be looking at Friends to Lovers, which I think is arguably one of the most popular tropes in the romance community. I think it might be my favorite trope actually, because I am of the belief that some of the best relationships started off as friendships. And so in this particular trope, even though some people might view it as boring, I really, really think it's sweet. This trope barely ever misses for me. Other tropes have much more likelihood of me not liking it. This trope is very, very consistent for me in the sense that I typically will enjoy it. The only time I really won't enjoy it is if I don't like the characters. It's not so much the premise of it that puts me off, if that makes any sense. The first book on my list is Daniel Cabot Puts Down Roots, and it's by Sebastian, and it's a part of her Cabot series. It's one of her earlier books, and with this book, it follows Alex and Daniel. So Daniel is a member of the Cabot family. They're kind of like a political family, think Kennedy type family, and he is basically a black sheep because he is a gay man. It's a historical romance. So I think it takes place in the 1960s, if I'm not wrong, or 1970s, one of them. And so he is best friends with a guy called Daniel. Daniel is an immigrant. I believe his family comes from Ukraine, but he is a doctor. He runs a hospital specifically for immigrant children in New York City. So they both live in New York City. Daniel is a freelance music journalist and he does like community work. And Daniel is very free spirited, very easygoing. Not that he doesn't have real preferences, but he just is able to adapt really quickly. Alex is not that way. Alex is pretty much like stuck in his ways and he has certain habits and things have to be done a certain way. And so their relationship works because there's give and take. I feel like if they had similar personalities, then they probably would clash. And so they are in the kind of situation in which they spend majority of their time together, but they are able to be completely honest with each other. Their relationship relies on 100% honesty at all times because that's just the way it functions. That's the way that they need it to be in order to be together. And also, while it wasn't explicitly stated, you can infer that Alex is on the spectrum. And so at the time, they wouldn't have had the words for it. They wouldn't have had the research that we have today about autism and the signs and the symptoms and all that stuff. And so one day they're with their friends, and their friends just kind of make it very obvious that they are under the impression that Daniel and Alex are in a relationship, despite them having never said that. And this book basically is the embodiment of we have been together all this time, and the only people who didn't realize it was us, essentially, because they are so in step with each other. They're so attuned to each other, their moods, their habits, their behaviors. Everybody looking from the outside in knows that they should be together or assumes that they already are. And then it's them just thinking that they're friends. And so that prompting by their friend really causes them to analyze whether or not they would be a good match. And so this book follows the journey of them basically trying to see if a relationship between them works. Obviously, there is attraction between them, but what it is that they're looking for is more so a sustainable relationship. And the thing that I really loved about this book is the fact that they were both willing to do anything to make sure that the relationship was a success. They were both willing to put each other first, to understand each other, to give each other space. And I don't think I've ever read a book in which space between two love interests is discussed in such a way, because I feel like when people talk about having solo time away from their romantic partner, it's usually seen immediately as a red flag. And in this book, it's really not. It's just more so them accommodating each other. And so I really love the fact that a lot of this book looks into them discovering how to make the relationship work for both of them. They're not following this set path of what a relationship should be. They're basically saying we are two different people with two different personalities, two different expectations, habits, interests, temperaments, and we are just trying to make a relationship that works for both of us. And if we are successful, then we will keep on doing that. And if we are not, then we can go back to being just friends. And I think I love I don't know whether to call it like flexibility, fluidity. I love the fact that was the dynamic, that they had to be honest with each other, that they realized that there's no room for dishonesty in their relationship. And I thought it was really admirable. It made it feel very fresh in a way that I don't think I read very often. I loved their relationship with both sides of their families. Daniel is very close to his parents as well, and his father is in a relationship with a man as well, and his mother is in a relationship with a woman, and he's very close with his mother. Daniel's mother is a standout character for me. I love her so much. I've loved her since Daniel's dad's book, and I loved her more even then. She's just such an eccentric lady. She's eccentric in the best possible way. She's like your typical, I don't know how I would describe it, almost like hippy dippy rich lady, but she absolutely loves Daniel and she absolutely loves Alex, and she's rooting for them as well. Alex's friend also was really good as well. Sebastian is one of my favorite authors for a reason. And if you read this book, you would understand why. It embodies everything that I love about her writing. And that is why I think that everybody should pick this book up. Next up, we have Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. This focuses on a relationship between Macy and Elliot. So, Macy and Elliot are childhood friends. They met when they were very little. Macy and her father moved into a house right beside Elliot's family. Elliot comes from a big family, he has many siblings, his parents are still together. And Macy moves in with her dad shortly after her mom passes away from cancer. And so they're just trying to have a new beginnings, adapt to a new life without her mother. She's kind of grieving in a very like childlike way, and my dad is trying to provide her a stable upbringing. And so she meets Elliot and his family, and they really just take both of them under their wing and they become extremely close. I loved this book because they have like alternating timelines. So they go between present and the past, when they were children and teenagers, to now them as adults. And I think this book was really special because I had never read a book like that in which they knew each other from childhood. So you get to see them experience awkward moments together, go through puberty, talk about their developing bodies, talk about dating, being each other's first love, but also dating people in between that. So I think it was really sweet. And the only thing I don't like about it is that in a story like that, you can typically expect the people that they've dated to be collateral damage, because it's pretty obvious from the start that they have always loved each other and have always had that little spark. They're not just friends, they've always had that kind of dynamic of having chemistry and being attracted to one another. And so my heart always hurts a bit for the collateral damage of the other partners that they bring into the equation. So I think if I had to have any problem with the book, it would be that. I just didn't, there's always hurt parties and things. And I know personally it would hurt to date somebody who had residual feelings for somebody else. And that's just kind of how I felt about it. But overall, I thought it was a really good book. It was one of the earlier books that I read when I first got back into reading. So I think for me, it holds a special memory of being a book that I really liked when I was just getting into reading again. And so I'm kind of emotionally attached to it for that reason, even though I have technically read better since. But it's a book that was extremely popular at the time that I read it, and I think still is. So I think if you love a childhood friends to lovers, this would be perfect, especially one that really dives into nuance and what it's like to have a love that stretches all the way from childhood up until your adulthood. After that, we have Time to Shine by Rachel Reid, and it follows Casey and Landon. They're both hockey players, but Landon plays for like the lower leagues, and he is called up because he's very talented. So he's called up to the NHL in order to basically substitute for one of the goalkeepers who has injured himself for the team that they're playing at, and Casey also plays for that team. Landon is dealing with grief, so he's just lost his sister and he hasn't particularly dealt with losing her, and so he's very much kind of almost drowning in it, but he's also very quiet, he's very reserved, he's not overly confident in his hockey abilities, even though that it's quite obvious that he's very good. And he's dealing with being very quiet, kind of reserved, dealing with grief, not being very outgoing, not being very confident as well. So all those things are weighing on him. And then you have Casey, who is very boisterous, very full of life. He is the life of the party. He's the kind of person that keeps the group together in a sense. He's very bubbly. So it's that kind of dynamic where Casey kind of brings him out of his shell, for lack of a better word. Casey does come from a wealthy family, and then he makes a lot of money himself being a professional hockey player. And so he meets Landon and he's like, "Why are you living in an apartment or a hotel? I have so much space. I have this huge house and it's only me that lives there. So you could come and live with me." And so they start living together, and then they get to know each other, and it's just such a sweet relationship. I loved the patience because you had the sort of dichotomy of Casey being like the playboy of the group. He's not really been in any committed relationship, he sort of sleeps around. And then you have Landon, who hasn't particularly explored his sexuality before, and it's not really something that he thinks about. Whereas with Casey, kind of like his sexuality is at the forefront of his mind pretty much all the time. And so they learn how to navigate both their dynamics and preferences together. And I think that you would enjoy it if you really like a sports romance, if you want something that is like largely lighthearted but has a bit of gravitas with the whole like grief story as well. In terms of what I didn't really like, I don't like the fact that kind of Casey had a very dumb stereotype that wasn't really addressed in the book. It kind of felt like he was a bit of a class clown and people didn't really take him seriously and they kind of put his intellect down. I don't really like that. It's not really something that I enjoy seeing anywhere, whether it's a book or in real life. I just don't really like it when somebody is stereotyped that way and everything about them is based on that one personality trait. Like, yes, he may not be the brightest person in the room, but I just don't like the fact that there was a lot of talking down on him for that. I just love the fact that he kind of injected color and life into Landon's life. And I think that if that's what you're looking for, you will too. Next up is The Roommate Risk by Talia Hibbert. And this follows Jasmine and Raoul, who have been friends since university. So they went to university together, they slept together one time, and nothing developed between them, no relationship. Raoul has always loved Jasmine, though. He fell in love with her pretty instantly after it happened. And so he's always had those residual feelings for her, but she hasn't really ever considered a relationship with him or really anyone because she has specific childhood traumas that she's never worked through before. While she will sleep with people, she just won't contemplate a relationship with them because she just doesn't want to have the kind of relationship that she experienced within her family dynamics. And so she becomes homeless due to like a plumbing issue. And so Roll offers for them to share his apartment. And so she moves into his guest room and things kind of go from there. And it was just really nice. Talia Hibbert is the queen of writing a reluctant FMC. She is just so determined to deny her feelings for Raoul, even though it's quite obvious that she's falling in love with him and they're getting along really great. And there's really little to no risk of a relationship not working between them because he's very obviously committed to her, but it's obvious to everybody else, like the reader, that she's committed to him, but it's not very obvious to her, and it takes her a while to recognize that her feelings are not just sexual. She actually deeply cares about him beyond their friendship, and it just takes her time to really, really decide if it's something that she wants to do, and she does. When they give into it, it becomes such a beautiful love story. He helps her address some of the trauma that she kind of hides from. I really enjoyed it when I read it. Not as much as I enjoyed Talia Hibbert's Brown Sisters trilogy. It was very good. Another book is And Then He Kissed Me by C.M. Daniels. I only discovered C.M. Daniels this year, and this is a book between Tommy and Eric. So they come from very different walks of life. It's a historical romance based in London. Tommy works in a factory in a council estate in London. So he's stuck in a job that he hates and he doesn't feel like he has much of a choice because he has to help provide for his family. But he also has put his dreams on the back burner in order to help his family. And then Eric comes from a wealthy family, but his parents are horrendous people, and they are just so cold and callous and have never shown any shred of love to him ever. And then they discover that he likes men, which makes it even worse. So they banish him to the council estate just so that they can hide him, because they don't want to be put in a position where people around them discover that their son likes men. And they've also deployed other people to keep watch over him and keep him employed and all that. And so he meets Tommy in the factory. Tommy introduces him to his friend group, and they're all part of the mod scene, which is something I had never heard of before. I'm going to read a little bit. So, mod, from the word modernist, is a subculture that began in the late 1950s London and spread throughout Great Britain, eventually influencing fashions and trends in other countries. It continues today on a smaller scale. Focused on music and fashion, the subculture has its roots in a small group of stylish London based young men and women in the late 1950s who were termed modernists because they listened to modern jazz. So, the relationship between them and the relationship within their friends is based around this mod scene that I had never heard of, but I found so fascinating. They would go dancing, they would listen to music. One of my favorite things about it is how kind of like this scene, this hobby that they all shared was like a character. The way that it was written felt like it had a life of its own. I really love the fact that I felt part of it. It's kind of like a historical insight into what being around at that time would feel like. It felt very special. There was talk about racism, about how sometimes record labels would give songs written by black musicians to their white counterparts. So there was talk about racism, and both within their friend group and within their mod scene. There was talk about being sacrificial for your family, but also needing to know that it doesn't make you particularly selfish to have dreams of your own and to follow your dreams. Tommy came from a really lovely family. I really loved his parents. I thought it was so enlightening, so heartwarming, and I just remember finishing it and just feeling quite emotional because I love a book that can make me. I don't know if this makes any sense, but I love a book that can make me root for characters as if they were real people, as if I knew them. And this book was one of those. It was just a really, really special book. And I cannot wait because next year, CM Daniels is publishing the next book in the series, which follows Tommy's friend. And I'm very excited about that. I cannot wait for it. Just beautiful, beautiful book. Next is We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian. I have talked about this book before when I talked about my favorite romances of all time. This is one of the best books I have ever read in my entire life. You know, when they talk about books that altered your brain chemistry, this is one of them. I will link the video in which I discussed my favorite romances of all time in the description box below. But all I have to say is, for me, this is the ultimate. This is Friends to Lovers at its peak. Like, I struggle to imagine how it could get better. Andy and Nick live rent free in my head, and they messed me up because after I read that book, I could not read any other author until I had gone through Cat Sebastian's entire backlog. They have such a chokehold on me that I wonder if I will ever be free of them. Honestly, it feels like a disease sometimes. I feel bad, but like not really, because I'm just like, what would my life have been if I had never discovered this book? Nick and Andy meet because Nick is a journalist that works for the paper called The Chronicles, and Andy is the son of the owner of The Chronicle. And so he comes to this company hoping to basically be Nick's understudy to see how the company works because he's eventually going to take it over and his father is nearing his retirement. So he really needs to speed up learning about the company. It's time for him to take his job seriously. And so they meet, they really bond, they become extremely close. Andy moves in with Nick when his girlfriend cheats on him and breaks off the engagement. He's very heartbroken. It is a story of just discovery. It is a story of the trials and tribulations of people who existed at a time when society wasn't willing to accept them and them navigating a relationship between two men. But I love the fact that their friendship, even after they got together, they still had elements of that original friendship that I just found extremely beautiful. And honestly, I still don't know how to talk about this book without getting slightly emotional. I think it might be my favorite romance book of all time. And I just go and watch my video of my favorite romances. I explained it ad nauseum, and I don't know. Every time I try to explain this book, I feel like I get worse and worse. I've read it so many times, I could probably quote it. I think Cat Sebastian is just a master at what she does. She creates these characters that just embed themselves in your heart so deeply that you cannot even you don't even remember what life was like before you encountered them. They are that special, and discovering Cat Sebastian's book, but in particular, We Could Be So Good, is probably one of the best things that have ever happened to me, as dramatic as it sounds. And I want everybody to read this book because, my goodness, is it one hell of a book. Next on my list is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Now, I just want to preface this by saying I don't really like this book. However, this book is massively popular. I cannot say this enough. When I first discovered BookTube 5 years ago, this was a book that every single booktube I mentioned, in every reading wrap up, every recommendation video, this book was everywhere. It is a lot of people's favorite book. This is not by any means my favorite book of Emily Henry's. I think it might be my second least favorite after Happy Place. But it's a book that follows Alex and Poppy as they navigate their friendship and the fact that they're both attracted to each other. They go on vacation every year. So this book also follows alternating timelines where they look at all the vacations they've been on and they talk about how they can no longer deny their feelings for each other after years of memories and years of them sort of attempting to have a relationship but ultimately being unsuccessful up until this point. Typically Emily Henry tends to write single POV books, so in the woman's POV, and I just quite frankly did not like Poppy. I didn't understand her. I thought she was ridiculous a lot of the time. I felt like their relationship was just miscommunication done in the way that I absolutely hate. Is like a lot of the problems that they face could have been solved if they just spoke openly and didn't beat around the bush. And it was not so much that there were any real barriers to them not being together. And so by the end of it, I was just extremely exhausted. I wasn't really in my DNF bag at the time, so I really did force myself to read it and I hated it. And I've never gone back to read it since because I had such a bad experience with it. I just don't think the book was for me. I have enjoyed Emily Henry's books, but this was just not one of them. At the end of it, I didn't really understand why they were together. I didn't understand their dynamic. The reason why I'm recommending it is because I know that there are tons of people that like this book. And so if there is a chance that you discover it and you also like it, then I obviously want you to enjoy it. Don't let me, yuck your yum. A lot of people like it and that must be for a reason. It just wasn't for me, and that's okay. Next on my list is Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh, and it follows Molly and Andrew. Molly and Andrew are both Irish, but they both live in the United States, I believe. I believe they both live in Chicago. Every Christmas, they both go back to Ireland to spend time with their families. And so they met each other actually on the flight back home and really bonded. So they create a tradition of, booking the same flight in order to go back home to Ireland. And then they meet on the same day of every year when they're traveling. And so on this particular year, the year in which the book is centered on, their flights get cancelled and it becomes a struggle to try and get on a flight to go back home. The thing is, I have very different approaches to Christmas, right? My scale is based on like Scrooge to Mariah Carey, right? So Andrew is very much on Mariah Carey's side. He absolutely loves Christmas. And Molly's a bit more meh on it. Like she's not particularly Scrooge, but on a scale from Scrooge to Mariah Carey, she's definitely more on the Scrooge end of the spectrum. And so this book really focuses on her making sure that Andrew can go because she just knows that he would be so disappointed if he wasn't able to go home for Christmas. And so she makes it her mission to make sure that he can go. And they do everything within their power, from going through traffic to booking connecting flights to, yeah, skipping lines, running through airports, just to make sure that he can get home. And in this particular year, Molly's sister is actually due to give birth. So it's also important that she is, home because she wants to be able to meet her new niece and nephew. So this book is also alternating timelines where they look back at all the years that they have spent together on the way back. So all the airport visits, all their trials and tribulations up until this point. And it's really sweet. Again, it's different because you don't really get to see a book with alternating timelines that really shows and depicts why they are so perfect for each other, but they were ultimately like either blind or resistant to. And I just really loved it. I suppose they didn't have a traditional journey to their own happily ever after. They had to go through some things, but I love that when they finally admitted to each other that every trip that they had been on, this 7-hour flight and this waiting for their flight that they've done every year, has led up to this moment. Also, the thing is that they actually genuinely did try to be just friends. They dated other people, and then they found that ultimately they should have just been dating each other the whole time, but obviously they had to go through what they had to go through in order to arrive at this point. Catherine Walsh in particular, I absolutely love her humor. I find her to be quite a very funny author. Not like she's trying too hard, but when I'm reading the book, it feels like I'm reading it through her own sense of humor. Just based on how she writes, I assume she's a very, very funny person in real life. It's a great Christmas book. So if you want to save it till that time of year, if you're the kind of person who only likes to read Christmas books during Christmas, then I'd wait. It's very light-hearted. Obviously, they touch on serious things, but for the most part, it's the kind of book where you can read, like, if you don't want anything too serious, if you're not looking for very heavy subject matter, if you just want to see people fall in love over Christmas, I think it's absolutely great. The next book on my list is The Sleeping Soldier by Aster Glenn Gray. And this follows a Union soldier called Russell and a man called Caleb who is going to school in 1960s America. Russell falls asleep and wakes up in the 1960s. He basically wakes up in this world that is extremely foreign. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand why people do certain things. He has lost everybody that he knew from the time period he was actually born, and so he's extremely lost, but he's also quite optimistic. So he's wanting to learn. He's extremely bold. He's extremely talkative. He actually becomes quite popular despite the fact that he's essentially an alien in this world. And Caleb really takes on that role of being his friend and teaching him, guiding him, and all the things involved in that. But Caleb also harbors feelings. So the entire book is in Caleb's perspective, and basically from the time he meets Russell, he is in love with him and they become closer. And I think this book was very heartbreaking because we're reading entirely in Caleb's perspective, and you can see just how much Caleb loved him but just didn't know how to express that without fear of being rejected, being outed, his life being over. We just have access to like his torment, his insecurities, his wants, his hopes, his dreams, and you can see how lost he feels because he has all these strong feelings but doesn't know how he could ever realize them or have a life in which He's happy. His dreams are not bad, they're not terrible, they're extremely normal, but in this society that he lived in, they were not welcome. It took me a long time to get through this book because my heart just kept on breaking for Caleb. It made me sad to realize just how lost and forgotten like queer people must have felt at that particular time, how much self-loathing that they would have had to navigate in a world that is determined to hate them, that is in a world that is determined to beat them down into heteronormativity. If it was so bad for someone like Caleb, who was essentially a white man, how much worse could it have been for like queer people of color? In order to feel it in the way that I think the writer wants you to feel it, you must put yourself in the character's shoes. Try as much as possible to do that. I think another thing I took away from this book is, I know we all talk about the patriarchy, and I know sometimes it feels overwhelming. I know that I sometimes feel overwhelmed by just the wealth of information that we now have access to. One of the things that it explored was how the patriarchy hurts everybody, and how the way that society is determined to put people into boxes, gendered boxes, especially just two gendered boxes with stringent norms and practices and questioning people's masculinity or femininity based on the fact that they must do certain things in certain ways, how it ends up just hurting everybody. Because they would talk about, I think Russell in particular came from a time, even though he came from an older time, he came from a time where men were much more affectionate with each other. So when he came into this world in the 1960s in university, he was always so confused about why he couldn't hug his friends that were male, why he couldn't like cuddle them. He was so confused. One of the most important things about this book is how we as people shape society. We can literally change society if we wanted to. The power is actually in our hands. We just have to band together, because it could be whatever we want it to be. If we as a collective decided that it was okay for men to be more affectionate, for them to be more open, more emotionally vulnerable with friends, we could do it. But what is holding us back, I think, is just years of conditioning and years of trying to put people into boxes. And this book really explores the hurt that that kind of thinking causes. And I just think it's a great book. It was a book of many lessons. And I think that's why I really liked it. They had so many fights and struggles, and they felt very real, and they felt almost a bit too real sometimes, because sometimes you want to read romance books to escape, but this is not a book of escapism. It's a book where you have to face challenges head on. And I think that was the toughest, but also the most rewarding part of the book. I just wanted them to be happy together. I just wanted to take away every barrier that was in their way of just something that was so beautiful. It just showed like the complexity of human nature, like love and understanding and patience, but also carelessness, and how sometimes our words can hurt other people, and then the effects of our actions on other people. It was just a great book for that. Struggled with getting into it and staying focused at times, because at the time it felt very heavy to me, but I definitely don't regret reading it. It was a great read. I loved all the history involved, but ultimately, not everything has to be easily digestible. Certain stories need to be told, and so I understand the importance of the existence of a book like this, especially if we as a society want to make any strides with being more accepting and loving towards people who may not look or think or act like us. And yeah, that was really what it was for me. I think I loved particularly what the book represented. And then the last book on this is Two Rogues Make a Right by Cat Sebastian. And this is a book in Cat Sebastian's Sedgwick series. This is the third book, which follows Will Sedgwick and Martin Easterbrook. They have been childhood friends. So they grew up around each other, although they come from completely different walks of life. Will comes from a relatively large family, not very much, but quite a lot of love in his family. And Martin comes from a wealthy family. He's aristocracy, he's titled. He's being raised by a father that is an absolute monster, not only to Martin, but just people in general. And there was a lot of his father touched on in the second book, which featured Will's brother. If you read that book, you understand just the depths of Martin's father's depravity. And so this book starts because Martin's father has passed on. Martin has an illness, respiratory illness, and so he does well when he's in the countryside, away from like the pollution of London. And so he had been living in the attic and was discovered because Will had been away in the military, and he didn't really have anyone that cared about him besides his father. His father, who relatively cared about him, he provided for him. He didn't really care much about Martin himself. He just kind of provided for him. And so when his father passed away, he had really no one to take care of him, and so he's discovered in the attic. And so basically they start with Will just trying to nurse him back to back to health. I was about to say back to life, but he wasn't dead, so back to health. Will is dealing with trauma from being in military. He was under the leadership of somebody who was extremely cruel. And so he's battling a bit of a drug addiction that he had used to cope with being in the military, being in that kind of abusive environment, but also trying to keep Martin afloat. And so they're together, isolated in this cottage, just basically trying to help each other through it. Like I've said, I cannot say enough about Cat Sebastian. If you're the kind of person who loves a caretaking trope, this book is for you. The vast majority of this book is them taking care of each other, nursing each other back to help, helping each other deal with their demons. The heart of this story is understanding, just the willingness to look at somebody, decide you love them, and just create a home, a safe space. Martin starts off very cold. The thing about Martin is he comes across as extremely cold, extremely prickly, not the most lovable person on the planet, but he loves Will so much. Will was essentially the only happy part of his childhood. It's a bit difficult for him to admit just how much he loves Will and how much he just wants Will out to himself. And Will has so much love to give. He's that kind of person where it's easy for him to give and it's easy for him to see people far beyond what they present. So they have that kind of push and pull dynamic, but ultimately they just decide to succumb to the feelings that they have for each other. And it's truly the most beautiful book. It's very slow, it's very loving. They come into the relationship with like so much baggage, and they're both extremely traumatized from previous experiences. So this book is very gentle. If you're just looking for the kind of book that gives people a reprieve from just terrible experiences, this is the book for you. This is another book where they've been in love without realizing for a very long time. And it's easy for them when they're isolated and with each other and have nothing else to do but talk, to slip into that, starting to actually admit their feelings for each other and just like wanting to be together. It's easy for them to slip into that dynamic. I loved also the side characters. I loved Will's relationship with his brothers. If you read the book, you know that there was a side plot with Daisy, who I absolutely adored, and her mother. If you're looking for a book that will make your heart just feel like it's bursting all the time, constantly throughout, this is the book for you. If you've ever maybe felt unworthy of love, felt like you'd never get it due to factors that are not within your control, more like external factors, and you wanted to restore your hope, I suppose, this is also a really good book for that. Cat Sebastian is truly something special, and now that I've gone through her entire backlog, I'm just waiting for her to publish new books. And if you are subscribed to her newsletter like I am, then you know that she's got 2 new books coming out, one this year, one next year. And I'm so, so excited. To be loved is to be known. Love is patient and love is kind. And that's just what true rogues make it right embodies, while not skipping through their challenges, I guess. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoy my recommendations. If you have other recommendations that you would love for me to read, please leave them down below. If you've read these books, what were your experiences? Did you have the same feelings? Do you have alternate opinions? Thank you so much for the likes, the comments, the subscriptions. I am truly appreciative of all the support that I get on this channel. It's truly such a privilege to not only be able to do this, but also to get feedback and thoughts back from other people as well, and to see the community growing. Thank you so much, and I'll see you when I see you.